Okay, great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is a repeat performance for a re-recording of the Data Center Development for Water Perspective webinar in the Regional Water Planning webinar series. And our speakers today are going to be Danny Johnson and Celine Benoit from the Atlanta Regional Commission's Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. I'll turn it over to them in a minute, but first, wanted to remind everyone about why we have these webinars. The Regional Water Planning webinar series provides council members with learning opportunities to support them as water planners. We share information about topics of common interest to the council members, and we record the webinars for future viewing by council members that can't attend the initial webinar, or in this case, to re-record what happened the first time so that we can share that information with all the council members. There's a lot of interest in this topic and wanted to make it available for everyone. There's a QR code with a link to the Regional Water Planning webinar recordings on this screen. Planning context: before we start the webinars, we'd like to remind folks of things they should be thinking about for their council discussions after the webinars. Many council members have expressed an interest in data center development across the state. So what we're hoping that you'll take back to your councils are some things to discuss about data centers, including how data center development relates to water resources management in your region as that relates to not only water supply, but also wastewater and stormwater. What are the trade-offs for your region in terms of data center development? What is a DRI? Celine's going to talk to us about that. And what considerations should be addressed in regional water planning, if any, after you've thought about this and discussed it with your council. I'm going to turn it over to Danny and Celine, and Danny's going to talk to us first, followed by Celine's presentation more specifically about the data centers, and then we'll have some Q&A afterward. Danny?
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's great to be with you again. We at the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District have been tracking the trends and thinking about how these data center trends are affecting our communities, have the potential to affect our future planning for water resources. And so what we're bringing to you today is a compilation of a lot of information that we've been gathering over the last several years and having presented in many different forums. And this is a great way for us to utilize data centers and share with you this information that is being done over the waves of our internet and all of the cloud storage space that these data centers provide for us. So with our efforts, we're here as a resource. We wanted to present this presentation to you all at one time, but we're always encouraged to hear from you individually. If you ever want to reach out to us, please do. If you have questions that you're dealing with locally, Celine is an outstanding resource. I encourage you to reach out to her after this presentation if you need anything. But we look forward to working with you during the plan update process. Our plan, just like your plan, is due in 2028. And so as we start to develop our water and wastewater forecasts with consideration for data centers, we know that the data center impacts are gonna have potential local impacts on utilities, but also on the energy forecast use of water for where a lot of the power is being generated across the state. Water is being used locally for cooling for data centers, but also for extra power demand on the grid. So we're going to take all this into perspective and working with the state and energy resource assessments in the future and kind of roll them into our regional water plan and along with you. So we're on the journey together, and we're here as a resource, and hopefully y'all can provide some feedback on how these data centers might affect your community and help us grow our knowledge base as well. So look forward to working with you. And I'm going to turn it over to Celine Benoit, who has been our lead on the data center work for the last couple of years and is the expert in all things data centers. So I want to transfer over to her, and thank you again. And great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. As Danny mentioned, they'll be presenting research on data center trends across our state that we have been collecting and working on for the past 2 or 3 years now. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and start. Next slide, please. So data centers is obviously a very hot topic right now. It is a global, national, and of course a local topic. There has been a rapid increase in development sites across the country as well as across our state. And this is bringing questions on our impacts to potential energy and water demands associated with the development and operations of these data centers, as well as putting additional pressure on our existing infrastructure. So this rolls into other concerns about the resources use, whether that's potential land, water, or air impacts, as well as secondary concerns such as noise, appearance, and opportunity costs. Finally, data centers are more often than not a new type of development that many of our communities have not seen before. And so developing these recommendations and zoning practices is something that is a first time for many of our communities. Next slide, please. So what does that look like for data center growth across the state of Georgia? Well, data centers are not a new concept. They've been around for decades, but the types of data centers that have been proposed for development within the past 5 or so years in Georgia has changed. We are predominantly seeing excuse me, co-location types, which is a data center where the space is rented to multiple companies to install their own servers and equipment. And secondly, there are hyperscalers, which are a single owner, but a large scale operator. So think about your Metas, your Googles, Microsofts, companies of that nature that have a global customer base and are operating 24/7, 365. There are also developers, and this is where they, as the name suggests, they come in and they just build the shell of the data center, and then it is sold to either a co-location or a hyperscaler once the construction has been completed. Next slide, please. So where does the state of Georgia stand in regards to on a national scale? Where are we? Well, we are still behind Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia continues to lead the country and the most operational as well as construction development for data centers. However, the state of Georgia is close behind. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of the geographical distribution, these points have been gathered through publicly available data, anything ranging from proposed sites to existing sites, so data centers that have been around since the 90s. But the red dots for the proposed are really what we've been seeing within the past 5 years or so. We're also seeing some instances of these projects being completed, designated by the green dots. There are occasions when the application for development is withdrawn or paused, which is designated in the orange. And there is some instances where the application itself is denied, and that is designated by the star. Next slide, please. So what does that look like in regards to energy demands? Well, to put it in a bit of a context that we can be more familiar with, 1 megawatt is enough to supply about 650 homes. So if there's a data center coming in, say requesting about 50 megawatts, you can provide power to that one small scale data center, or you can provide power to a community with 32,500 homes. But what we're seeing now is at 50 megawatts, this would have been considered a large scale data centers a few years ago, but now the requests that we are seeing are easily in the hundreds of megawatts. Next slide, please. And there you go, even upwards of 1 gigawatt. So Georgia Power, of course, is in active conversations with data centers, operations, and developers, and they are reforecasting their projected peak demands up through 2044. So if you look in 2022, they released a peak demand estimate of 18.2 gigawatts, but in 2023, they had to revise that up to 25 gigawatts. And then again in 2025, they updated it to 28.1 gigawatts. So that is almost a 10 gigawatt increase from that initial forecasting back in 2022. Now, this is being reformulated based on large-scale industrial customers, but 80% of those customers are from these data center proposals and operations that we're seeing across our state. Next slide, please. So what does that look like for cooling and water use in regards to data centers? Well, cooling, as I said earlier, these data centers, they're operating 24/7, 365. And so these servers are generating a lot of heat just by doing these computational demands. So it is really imperative that the data center maintains an operational temperature, an optimal temperature. And if the temperature were to fall out of that zone, the technologies can experience something called fatal heat, which is often irreversible damage to the technologies within these data centers. So not only does that threaten the billions of dollars that these companies are investing in the technology, but if they are a co-location site, then that would be a potential disruption to their clients' customer base. And those clients or customers could also in turn have customers. So you could see it has an extensive ripple effect. It's estimated that about 30% of the data center's energy usage goes towards the cooling methodologies alone. Next slide, please. So the types of data center cooling, there's a variety of different types that have been implemented around the globe, but there are some types that are relevant here to Georgia. The first is evaporative water cooling. This is what we have seen in the past, as well as have seen some initial proposals come in and propose. So evaporation, think of the root word there. This is a very water intensive approach to cooling. Approximately 80% of the water provided to cool the data center site is lost to the atmosphere. So this is important, especially within the state of Georgia, because when that is lost to the atmosphere, say, for example, here in Metro Atlanta, it can form a cloud over another state or another region and not returning that water to the local water supply and ensuring that we have a continuous flow across our state. So this does have a reduction in the return water flow to rivers and reservoirs, depending on the geographic location of the site. But there's also closed loop cooling. So in comparison to evaporative cooling that is a once through cycle, closed loop cooling is a water glycol mix that is able to circulate within the system within several concentrations. So it significantly uses less water, but in turn, it does require more energy. There are always trade-offs, when it comes to these different approaches. Also, it is more expensive for the developer to put in when they're constructing the site. And it also can require a larger physical footprint within the data center itself. So that could be potentially lost space that could have gone to servers. So it's important to understand when these proposals come in to understand and identify the type of cooling that is being proposed for the site. Next slide, please. So closed loop cooling, as I mentioned on the previous slide, it uses significantly less water. And so this provides an added resilience to not only the facility, but the community and the region as well, if we are to go into periods of drought and or, excuse me, if there were to be emergency outages that would prevent or minimize it, restrict water flow, or even minimize it at times given the different emergencies. So this really helps to reduce any detrimental impacts to our regional water supply. So as I mentioned, there are those trade-offs, but really it does come down to that closed loop cooling provides a much better steward for our limited water resources in comparison to evaporative cooling. Next slide, please. So cooling trends in general that we are seeing across the state. In regards to water demands, most of these proposals are not asking for millions of gallons per day requests, and that was what was initially feared, especially with the potential for evaporative cooling to be implemented. But we are not seeing that trend continue to grow. Instead, we are seeing developers shifting to installing closed-loop cooling or similar types of technologies. However, there is still the option that these sites can go full evaporative cooling. There's nothing to directly prevent them from doing so. However, the current trends do not indicate that this would occur. Next slide, please. So the million-dollar question is, well, how much water are data centers requesting? Well, there's no blanket answer to that. It really depends on a multitude of variables, everything from the size, the scale. Is it one building or is it a campus that houses multiple buildings? Are there planned expansions in the future? What is the nature of the facility? Is it a standard data storage site, or is it AI, artificial processing, where AI and these large language models, their computational demands are much higher than what you would see with traditional data storage, because when we are providing that prompt to the large language model, it is actively and almost instantaneously scrubbing the entire internet to provide you with a unique response. Those computational demands are much higher. There's also the associated energy demands with the site, and of course, the type of cooling. Is it air cooling versus liquid cooling? Air cooling was what was formerly used, but it can no longer be used as the primary cooling methodology, just given the increase of computational demands from these technologies. And if it is liquid cooling, is it evaporative cooling, the water intensive approach, or is it closed loop, the better resource steward? So kind of just taking a little bit of some case studies here across the state of Georgia. For proposals of sites, we have seen evaporative cooling requests as much as 9 million gallons per day. While in comparison, we have seen proposals using closed loop technologies with a range usually between 5,000 to 50,000 gallons per day. So really you can see the magnitude of difference between those two types of technologies.
Celine, do you want to point out what happened to that 9 million gallon a day proposal?
Yes. So given as I mentioned, the initial proposal was for 9 million gallons. Given the concern that brought, given the location, there was communications and discussions, and that number was then lowered now to, I believe, 6 million gallons per day for that site.
That one's down to like 300. It's closed loop now.
Oh,
it's 300.
Even better, it has now been revised from evaporative down to closed loop cooling. So really being involved in discussions with these developers as early on as possible helps prevent requests such as this, and helps educate the developer on what are the best resource management practices for the region and the state. Next slide, please. So this rolls into larger considerations for the local communities, everything from economic impacts, job creation, land use, infrastructure, health impacts, and other critical issues. Next slide, please. This was a quote from Prince William County in Virginia that I feel provides a good background and approach to having these conversations with data center developers and understanding how they could function within your community. It really requires the strategic planning to ensure the community needs are addressed to help achieve that long-term economic prosperity for the county if they do choose to welcome a data center into their community. Next slide, please. There are, of course, some benefits that could be brought with the presence of a data center. The first one that is often mentioned is the significant tax revenue growth, anything from property, businesses, and sales tax. Financial planning, direct revenue that could go back into the community, everything from education, housing funds, fire and safety investments, even infrastructure upgrades. It is possible that the data center could serve as an epicenter for additional commercial and economic growth, where other companies or restaurants or hotels, they see the presence of the data center and they say, oh, you know what, this would be a good place for us to seed other economic developments. Finally, workforce development. A data center could provide or support workforce training programs for the communities, whether this is for on-site jobs at the data center itself or other skilled technical positions in other fields. It also has the ability to create high-paying construction jobs during that construction period for the site. Next slide, please. In regards to the considerations for land use today and moving forward, it is important to understand the physical infrastructure being requested for development. What does it look like? We do hear the concerns over having a large gray box. Okay, well, how could the physical infrastructure be catered to better work within the community? Does the presence of the data center construction or an operational phase shift any other large development plans the community had? This is important when reevaluating comprehensive planning or even understanding that maybe this one data center might encourage other data center proposals. So recognizing and understanding that possibility is important as well. And finally, adaptive infrastructure. The physical requirements for data centers today, given how quickly technologies are changing and developing, that same physical infrastructure could potentially be obsolete 5, 20, 10 years from now. We just don't know at this time. So is there a potential that the physical infrastructure could end up being what is known as a stranded asset? So think about kind of our strip malls. So asking these questions and asking what the developer's approach is to the infrastructure is imperative. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, this is an example of a operating data center here within the state of Georgia. Just to give you an idea of the layout, this site does also have on-site water storage. I'll cover that in a few slides. You can see the cooling systems, the backup generators. They do cover almost the entire back wall of that second larger building there. So just understanding the amount of backup generators that are needed for these sites, it's not just one. Next slide, please. Some other environmental and public health impacts, everything from addressing stormwater runoff and quality, making sure that the construction doesn't lead to increase in downstream flooding or stream bank erosion. There is potential impacts for air quality, whether that is the controlling of construction dust during the building phase, as well as potential air quality impacts once the site is operational. When we were looking at the previous slide, those backup generators, they need to be tested often on a monthly basis. So what are the particulate matter being exhausted as a result of these testings? So understanding how often the testing occurs and at what time of day is also important. There are also some instances where communities are putting forth ordinances during that construction phase of these data centers. This can address things like buffer zones, lighting being directed away from adjoining properties, especially if it's in a residential area, landscaping, noise thresholds, and coordination with firefighting and other emergency services. This is important, and it's often it can be overlooked at times, but ensuring the coordination and that the fire and emergency services are also involved in these discussions is important. Next slide, please. Some other community concerns. There's the noise impact, anything from the generators to the site construction, land development. There might be tree removal, stormwater runoff, associated traffic increases, or potential impacts on associated property values with nearby communities. This can help to be addressed by having an increased community awareness and communication, engaging with the community by having public outreach sessions. If the developer is able to attend, that is also favorable. This can allow for a better understanding of what's going on on the resident side of the community, and have an opportunity for them to mention or propose questions that they might have. Next slide, please. There are wastewater concerns when it comes to the site. Of course, the treatment should meet the standards under the individual industrial wastewater permit, but also just considering the discharge rate and temperature impacts on the public systems itself. Next slide, please. Some water service considerations. Again, it is important to understand the planning for the immediate demands of this data center and future capacity needs, especially if there are planned expansions in the future. Does this require a need for additional infrastructure? Anything from larger water lines, booster pumps, storage tanks? These are things that should be mentioned in the early discussions, and possible if the data center developer is willing to assist financially if that additional infrastructure is needed. It's important to understand that at times data centers do consider themselves to be critical infrastructure, similar to that of hospitals. So understanding what that looks like in regards to drought management, as well as emergency outages, whether that is having discussions or plans with the data center, or even what kind of efforts they have on site, such as water storage tanks that could assist them with maintaining their operations during these times. Next slide, please. Well, so the perfect data center, that really, there's no one size fits all. It really comes down to the community recognizing what's important for them today as well as in the future, and expressing those sentiments with the data center developer to see how they can be integrated to ensure the economic prosperity for the community as well as for the data center. Next slide, please. And that can be assisted through CBAs or community benefit agreements. This helps to address a lot of those public concerns. It also allows for transparency, affordability, and sustainability for these communities. So taking key issues for the community, putting them in writing through the CBA agreement allows both the data center and the community to understand what those concerns are and how they will be addressed. Next slide, please. So the Department of Community Affairs has a DRI process, a Development of Regional Impact. These are applications that must be submitted for types of developments across the state. There's a specific threshold for data centers now, that if a data center has a certain number of square footage, they must apply and go through the DRI process. Here are just some examples of the comments that the Atlanta Regional Commission has provided as a standard response for these DRI applications. There are some regional perspectives built in, so it's important to identify what is important to your region in regards to its resource management and integrating those within your comments. Next slide, please. There are efforts occurring across the state in regards to moratoriums where data centers are taking time to pause and evaluate their zoning ordinances or ordinance development, or passing these ordinances before the data center is allowed to break ground, as well as just other reasons. It just kind of depends on the location. But this is also encouraging those ordinances to be developed across the state and passed. There are also some examples of zoning rules being adopted, again, because these data centers are often a site development that is new to the region. Next slide, please. So, big picture here, it's important for the developers to engage with water providers early in these project planning discussions. So, having water utilities present in these conversations is really imperative to understanding what their anticipated water project or demands are. Can those actually be met by the regional water supply? What plant type of cooling do they intend to take? And again, just having those discussions to make sure that it is the best fit for the community. And so for water providers, it's considering those discussion points and establishing the parameters for water use for the data center. And for local leaders, it means supporting policies for balanced and resilient growth for the communities and the region at large. Next slide, please. So finally, it really just comes off to understanding the trade-offs when it comes to data center proposals, data center construction, and data center operations, and taking those trade-offs to make informed decisions that are best for the community. Next slide, please. And with that, that concludes the presentation, and Danny and I are here to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Danny and Celine, and I will stop sharing the slides. And I want to share with you a few of the questions that we had during the initial webinar a few weeks ago. The first question that came up was on the closed loop systems. Do they have to flush those systems out, and how often does that occur?
Yes, those systems do have to be flushed out. How often? It really depends on the type of closed loop system, the brand that they imply. Really, I think I've heard about on average it's at least about once a month, I believe, is a system flushing.
And I've heard some people say that they do it once every 10 years. It's like everything we've heard everything under the sun. So,
Yeah.
and
One
it
of
comes
those-
down to the latest version of the technology that they're using.
It depends, right? Yeah.
Oh,
Makes sense.
but to add on to the context there, when they flush, they typically provide that flush water back to an NPDES system, something that's been permitted by the state to receive that water, because it's typically got other constituents of refrigerants and things that need to be treated before it's disposed of to the environment. So sometimes people will say, oh, I bet the water quality near these is horrible because they're flushing everything into the stream. They can't do that. The Clean Water Act protects our streams from just having untreated wastewater discharged back to them. So it's important to know that the state of Georgia manages the NPDES permitting discharge requirements. And if it's going back to a centralized sewer system, the controls that the local authority would put in place to have an industrial pretreatment permit would apply to these data centers. So it's important to understand and have those conversations with your utility to make sure they have an industrial pretreatment process and program in place in accordance with their permit.
Thanks. We had another question that was about noise, and I think the question was asking when local communities are developing ordinances, what are they targeting in these noise ordinance or with respect to noise in the ordinances?
So from the ordinances that have been developed, I think there's an acceptable range of 60 to 75 decibels. There are some standards that can be looked at for reference. I know EPA has a tier 5 standard recommendation when it comes to generators.
Yeah, there's several of the ordinances that Celine had on our website have got decibel levels that their community has chosen, and it has a lot to do with how much buffer you're planning to put in your ordinance, or from other impacted land uses, and what's acceptable to the communities that the data centers might be located nearby. So
Sounds good. The Upper Plain Council had a presentation just last week about Spalding County's new ordinance. So I wanted to add to the list. The council members found a lot of things in that ordinance helpful to them to consider. I think my remaining questions are with respect to the DRIs, the development of regional impacts. These are something that the councils can track.
Yes, so the DRIs, these are publicly available. If you just Google DCA DRI, you will see the application list there. I will say that it's for the application list is not just limited to data centers. So you do have to look and find, I think it's called technology development that includes data centers is the new category they have made for data center specific applications.
And if you look through the list of data centers across the state, you'll find that they've got an application that's posted that asks a lot of questions to the developer to fill out. And some of those things are going to say, what's your anticipated water use? What's your anticipated sewer need? And that helps the community kind of understand what's coming. But what we've found is that a lot of times developers can put in a DRI when they are just kind of in the concept phase and haven't really figured out their engineering yet. And so what you might see on the first application from a DRI could be wildly different than what's negotiated with the local community at the end of the day. And we've found that to be the case. For instance, that 9 MGD request in Coweta County for project sale, it's now much, much lower than that, which has been negotiated with the local community because they changed their technology. They went in with one assumption, and at the end of the day, after a year of negotiations and coordination with the community, it's now a closed loop system and using far, far less water.
That's really helpful input. And the template that you shared is something that some of our councils that met just recently really were interested in developing some of their own. Any suggestions to them as they're thinking about how to respond? And I mean, the other thing I understand is that the DRI response is usually only about 2 weeks. And so probably helpful to have some things in your back pocket ready to go.
Yeah, in the early days of the DRI process, when we started seeing data centers hit our wires just about every month, we decided it was important to create the template response that we can apply to every community's data center DRI, and it really highlights the need for just thoughtful water planning in our metro area where we have limited water resources, the need for concepts that bring in waterless cooling technologies are preferred because that keeps water in our lakes and rivers and available for downstream users. So it was regional language that we wanted to create that was important to Metro. But if you're going to take a template from what Metro did, it may not apply to every regional water council area. So I think it's a good template to use, and I think there's some ways that each council should put their own flavor on what their challenges are for water management and think about it that way.
Really good advice. Thanks, Danny. I just want to thank you both for sharing this information with all of those involved in regional water planning across the state. And Danny, you have a closing point there?
I wanted one reference that I forgot to add to your Q&A list that we talked about last time was that the state, so far, all of the data centers that we are aware of in the state of Georgia have come up and have been proposing communities that have a centralized utility, a water distribution network and a wastewater utility nearby to connect onto. There's nothing that prevents them from asking directly to EPD for a water withdrawal permit or a groundwater well withdrawal permit for their water usage. the question was asked to EPD in the last one, if they have received any request for any data center direct water supply applications. And so far the answer has been no. And that was like April 1st or March 30th. So that could change. And just recognize that as we look at our water resources from a regional standpoint, EPD does forecast the groundwater for all of us in our regional areas. And if we started to see a trend of data centers or any other utility starting to look at their own permitted system, it's the regional process that provides that input with EPD directly to let us engage in that discussion and comment on those types of proposals, which might otherwise not come through the city or the county or the local water authority.
It's a really good point, Danny, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
And Kristen, you're frozen, I believe, right at the end of our.
Yeah, you're frozen for me. All right. Can you see me now?
Okay.
Or hear me now? I was wondering where it was freezing. I guess it's
All
my
right.
end.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, you're still breaking up. So I hope you've been able to capture everything.
We're going to sign off.
Yes.
all right.
And thank you all so much for the time today.
Thank you, Danny.
Madison,
Thank you,
chat.
Celine.
Okay.